Thank you all for coming today. Obviously, you all know why we're here. We're at the Eugene Yacht Club, and what brings us together is youth sailing. The sail school is the largest single event that we put on at the club every year. It is the most number of volunteers. It is the most number of boats on the water. It is the most number of people. It's the largest budget. It is, if Dan were here, he would say it's the greatest impact on our grounds of the entire year. It's also the most number of guests that we will ever have other than the 4th of July. It's a big, big event, and we want to do it right. I like to start by just talking about the mission of our club. And it is the mission of the Eugene Yacht Club to promote general interest in the sport of yachting. We've added to that, we accomplish this mission through teaching the skills of navigation, boat handling, boat safety, facilities and grounds. The last line is what I want to focus on almost entirely today, where all persons are welcome, respected, and feel safe. It's critical to our mission that we have a policy in place where we welcome, instruct, and where all of our children and youth in particular feel in a safe environment and are treated with dignity. So that's what we're about today. There are 3 groups that are addressed, and they're on your sheet at the front. The first, we want to focus on you as volunteers. And you are all in volunteer capacity. Somebody asked me last week, does this apply to every member of the club that comes out to go sailing on Tuesday afternoon? No, it's the volunteers that we're addressing because you have a supervisory responsibility over our kids and over our youth. The second that we're going to focus on in a little bit is our club itself. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. We want to protect our club. And the third and the most important is we want to protect our youth and our kids. We're going to focus on, first of all, just the volunteers. We want to protect you as a volunteer because we want to make sure you're not accused falsely or you know where the boundaries are in interacting with our youth and with our kids. Accusations happen all the time. Sadly, often they're true, and people have crossed the line they shouldn't have crossed. But we want you to know where those lines are. We want to be very clear about that. We want to give you guidelines that are something you can just keep in the back of your head so you know where that line is, how you deal with difficult situations. We really want to send a clear message to our families. When families bring their kids and youth out to the club these days, they expect to know and their kids to know how they're going to be treated. We want to tell you and we want to tell our young people, if you feel as though someone has treated you incorrectly, abused you, harassed you, this is how we resolve that in our club. So we'll give some pretty clear guidelines down that. So that's the volunteer piece. The second component, as I alluded to a moment ago, is we want to protect our club. We have a fiduciary responsibility as a board, as leadership in the club, to protect us from being sued. So constantly lawsuits are happening around child and youth sexual abuse and misconduct. $1 million to $5 million is not an uncommon settlement at all. I was involved in a lawsuit as an expert witness in the church, in the Methodist church, for 3 young men back in the 80s. The event happened 20 years earlier. And the lawsuit was settled for $3.7 million. So if you imagine a $3.7 million settlement for the Eugene Yacht Club, we would be out of business. First of all, we don't have $3.7 million. But our insurance company would pay, and then they would say to us, bye-bye. You're no longer insurable. And if they ask us in a trial, well, what did you do to train your volunteers so that this wouldn't happen? And we said, well, you know, we're all family out here. We kind of know each other. The judge would say, maybe $5 million is what you need to be fined instead. So the other part of it I want to point out is that we want to protect our reputation. We have a reputation as a safe place. It's one of the reasons people join our organization, because they want a place for their kids and youth to be in a safer environment. And reputations are something that is really easy to lose and hard to gain back again. So the third component is we want to protect our children and youth. I would not want you to leave today and say, boy, I spent an hour and a half making sure EYC doesn't get sued. Because that isn't the point. The real point is to protect our kids, to protect the kids that are out here on the grounds. That's our number one goal, as I've illustrated on the board there. This policy has been evolving, and our whole understanding of how we interact with children and youth has been evolving over time. This is an evolving policy, and it's evolving because of that first bullet. What we considered to be acceptable in the 1980s, 70s, 60s is just not acceptable today. The way we interacted with kids, the way we interacted with touch. In the last 10 years, in the last 5 years, we've seen dramatic evolution. In the last 2 years, we've seen dramatic evolution in the relationships of women and men in professional settings, school settings, what people consider to be safe touch or safe conversation or comfortable or uncomfortable. This is a moving target, and we want to kind of try to stay ahead of it. Here's the stat I want you to fix in your mind and not forget. 1 out of 4 girls and 1 out of 6 boys are sexually abused before their 18th birthday in the United States, right now. And they carry with them often scars for the rest of their life. We don't want that kind of stuff to happen here at camp. And we're in a very unique, challenging setting in a lot of ways. They're very often abused, most often abused, if you follow these stats as I have, by people that they know and trust. The other reality that has emerged in the last, say, decade or so is the prevalence of bullying and the awareness of bullying. Bullying often happens from peer to peer. And so if you observe bullying in your class or in the campground, we want you to go and talk to our ombudspersons about that and say, look, I think I'm observing some bullying or something's happening in my class. We will go make sure we sit down and have a talk with parent and kid and begin to address that, because that's a really common issue. Yeah?
We should not address it at the time it occurs.
I think you should start with the person involved, but if you feel like it's a bigger issue, we want to immediately get the director involved, and we want to go to that parent. The parents are supposed to be around enough that week that we can sit down and talk to the parents. Absolutely. We are a day camp. I think all of us know that. Kids are going to come and they're going to spend the day with us. Some are going to spend the night on the grounds. Some are just going to be here during the day. But we are like a day camp. But we're also like an overnight camp. We have evening activities, and we have kids spending the night on the grounds. We have kids that are here in their grandparents' trailers or in their parents' trailers. Our day camp takes place in multiple settings. Just think about it for a moment. We have buildings like this. We have a campground. We have a trailer park. We have a huge lake out here. So we have all kinds of settings in which kids and adults are interacting. It's a very unique environment in that regard. And our day camp has people signed up for sales school that are probably in their 6th or 7th decade of life, all the way down to 10-year-olds and even younger. There aren't many camps that have that kind of range. There aren't many classes that have that kind of range in it. So we have a lot of different things going on at once. We also have hundreds of members that just come out during the week. They might come for a meal. They might come to race on Thursdays. They might come out just because they like the energy at sales school. We just kind of want to see kids enjoying sales school. And they have nothing to do with our staff or with you as volunteers, but they're on the grounds and potentially they're around our kids. So you see some of the interesting pieces of our moving puzzle. Just a couple of definitions to make clear. For the purposes of this policy only, a child is anyone from birth through their 11 years of life. A youth is anyone from 12 years through 17 years. And a volunteer, this is you all, is anyone who is instructing or has a supervisory capacity or an official EYC function. Volunteer might be a cook in the kitchen. Volunteer might be a rescue boat operator, and several of you are here who are just interacting only perhaps if you're actually rescuing. The rest of the time, you're not necessarily interacting. So our policy applies to people with official supervisory or teaching or rescuing or that kind of instruction with our youth. Abuse. Abuse takes many, many different forms. When many of us think about abuse of children or youth, what comes to mind first is sexual abuse. And that's why I gave you that statistic, that 1 in 4, 1 in 6 is a very big issue. But abuse also includes physical abuse, overly restraining, and particularly today, now, verbal abuse has become a more and more aware area of abuse. Yelling, screaming, demeaning, punishing, harassing somebody sexually by way of language or innuendos or jokes. All of those fall into the category of abuse. I think I've got a couple just things up here. You can sort of look down through that. And these are areas, all of which have their own particular ins and outs. And we'll try to spend some time before we leave today talking about each of them and citing some sort of concrete examples and boundary issues. We have talked about 7 prohibited behaviors. The first behavior that we talk about is profane or degrading language. We don't want to use language, as I used to tell my kids, if you wouldn't tell it to your grandma, then probably it isn't a good idea to tell it to somebody else. So I recognize that most of us in this room are adults. We may have a 1 or 2 that maybe aren't adults, and the way we speak to each other on our sailboats, or the way we speak on a Thursday night, or the way we speak between the boat and the rescue boat, or the boat and the committee boat, maybe a certain pattern we've evolved. We have to dial that back at sales school. And remember, we're working with kids. So obviously we don't want to swear at them. We don't want to swear about them. We don't want to tell them that they're stupid or ignorant or they're never going to get it or they're a loser. No matter how frustrating we get, we don't want to use profane or degrading language with our youth. Again, we're working down our list to the obvious ones. We don't want to inflict any harm on our kids. We don't want to hit them. We don't want to slap them. We don't want to, overly restrain them. We don't want to threaten them. If you don't get down here in 5 seconds and get in that boat, I'm going to smack you. That's probably not going to motivate us to get down there faster. So we don't want to threaten to do them, injure them physically. Again, on the obvious ones, committing a sexual offense against a minor is a felony and often results in a jail term. Some of the things that people often aren't sure about are touching a minor at all. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Pinching is obviously prohibited. Groping, any kind of sexual intercourse is prohibited. Sexual contact, inappropriate touching, simply no touch at all. Not side hug, not back hug. You just don't do that. So a kid gets hurt, and they appear to have a pretty big bump on their head because they've got hit by a boom. Before you do any kind of touch, you need to say, well, it looks like you might have a cut on your forehead. Was it okay with you if I take a look at it? Or they're just upset, crying, because they're cold or whatever. We just aren't able to comfort kids anymore by giving them a hug to warm them up. We're going to have to get some help for them, hopefully get a blanket, get them warmed up. But the idea of sort of putting an arm and comforting them until they stop crying, we just aren't able to do that now. That's one of those evolving things that's just changed. The key is asking permission. Obviously, if they're bleeding profusely, you're going to have to try to stop the bleeding. or if they have a broken arm, you have to say, well, let's get it immobilized. Is that okay with you, if I do that? It's the permission piece. In the same category of number 3 is number 4, making a sexual advance or engaging in verbal, visual, or physical conduct of a sexual nature. And where this usually breaks is the telling of a joke with a sexual overtone. That is no longer considered acceptable around kids and sets us up for a potential sexual harassment. Telling a joke of a sexual contact, even when the student is not the subject of that joke, but the sexual content is the subject of the joke, can be a cause for sexual harassment now. On to another one that is should be obvious, but has a couple of quirks because of EYC. Furnishing alcohol or drugs to a minor, again, is not only against the law, but it is against our rule. And I don't think anybody in the room would automatically say, to their 16-year-old, oh, I'm going to have a beer, would you like one? But the other piece is allowing a situation where there's access to alcohol and drugs. We do have a lot of alcohol in our grounds. We do have times in which people are having a beer or a glass of wine. And during this week, the kids are really smart. I mean, the teens figure out where it's accessible real fast. But we don't want to make it easy. So if you have some on your deck or around your trailer, or if you have a picnic going on or whatever, or you're having a glass, don't walk away and go to the restroom and leave it there, because chances are it'll be gone when you come back. The other thing is, we don't want to have excessive discussion of alcohol around the kids and our youth. How many beers somebody had after last week's Thursday night race, how wasted they were 3 years ago at this one event at the club. That's not the atmosphere we want to set for our young people at the club. So we just want to be aware of that whole conversation around alcohol. It's just something we want to kind of keep to ourselves. The next one's kind of tricky. Being alone with a minor. And specifically, if you look at your sheet, it's being alone with a minor in non-public areas. So we have a lot of public areas of the club, but we have a lot of non-public areas too. Tents are non-public. Trailers are non-public. The restrooms are big time non-public. Your boat is non-public. So if an isolated area of the grounds, the South 40, we want to have a 2-adult rule. So if you are wanting to talk to a young person for some concern, some reason, they want to talk to you, either A, do it in a public area, or better yet, B, get another adult to go with you. The kids aren't expected to know this rule. We'll explain it to them, so as adults, we have to set the example. And that's particularly true. A couple of you guys are junior instructors, so you help them with classes. With the older teens, it applies to you guys as well. Non-public area, even though you might be 17 and they might be 17. For this week, you're a volunteer instructor, so we have to be aware of that. Now, it isn't our job to make sure that none of the sales school students are with one another in non-public areas. If it becomes a concern, then Katie is the contact person. It's like, hey, I got a couple of kids, they're kind of always wandering off the grounds and, down to the sticks or something or whatever. Some kids are going to meet each other. Some kids are going to fall in love. Some kids are going to fall in love and out of love in the course of 1 week. Maybe 2 or 3 times. That isn't necessarily our concern. It's really the adult-youth interaction that is our concern.
But if the clubhouse was empty, and you're an adult with a minor, does the clubhouse, if nobody else is around, does that become a non-public space?
It probably does, yeah. I try to fast forward in those situations and think, okay, I'm in a court of law, and somebody says, well, I was in the clubhouse alone with Jim, and nobody was around. Yeah, that probably was a non-public space.
Does that include you, an adult or volunteer, being in the clubhouse with maybe 2 of the students?
How we've defined it is 1 adult, 1 student
Yeah.
rule. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think we would want one student, one adult on a boat. For this particular, we all are going to have students on our boats at other times.
Less tricky with Zumas or lasers or.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that the lake necessarily itself would constitute, I mean, if it was a boat with a cabin, if it was a laser, I think, yeah.
I'm over.
We have some gray area there, absolutely. Those are all good questions, absolutely. Let's see, I think one more thing, yeah. Yelling in the case of a non-emergency. This is one of my favorite ones. We don't want to yell in cases of non-emergency because we want to save yelling for cases of emergency. If there really is an emergency, we want to raise our voices. Oftentimes when we're trying to instruct kids, there's a lot of yelling going back and forth. Saying it again louder doesn't usually communicate any better than saying it the first time quieter. Although in our minds, we're saying, "Till her over." Well, saying it twice that loud, "Till her over," you have to find a different way, right, Terry? You have to find a different way of saying it because the first one didn't work, not just more volume on the first one. And a lot of times, as rescue boat drivers have often said to me, we can't tell when there's some yelling going back and forth if that's an emergency and they want our help, or if they're just frustrated trying to get the kids to, tack over so that you're not so far away. So we want to keep yelling to genuine emergencies, and that helps our young people realize what's a genuine emergency as well. Reporting abuse. Get another adult, and the best other adult is probably Katie, or Kevin, or John, or Pat Skeen, our two ombudspersons. Get another adult. We want to make sure that the child is safe. If you have a concern about another adult on the grounds and their interactions, so two adults are going to sit down and have a private talk with the person. Okay, say, "Hey Steve, I think I observed in this situation that you were pretty close to the line, or you were stepping over the line. If that doesn't work with Steve, then we're going to report to the ombudspersons. They're the contact people that will hopefully resolve situations before they get any further. If we need an investigation, then the ombudspersons will investigate and go on to the board of trustees, will begin to work up the leadership ladder of the club. This is a really important one. Just so you know, if we have an adult youth-child interaction that falls into the category of mandatory reporting, if there's sexual abuse or physical abuse, any of the mandatory reporting, we will report you. We must report you. We have mandatory reporters that are a part of our sales school because of their role as teachers, counselors. There's any number of us that are mandatory reporters, but the club will not hide from law enforcement what's happened, because that's not something we can do legally, and it's not something we can do ethically. The board investigates. It may be possible and it may be prudent at times to suspend a volunteer for a period of time, the rest of the week, until something is resolved. That might be the best way to deal with it. We're going to deal with things confidentially as a board, and bring them to resolution. We haven't had any abuse that we've had to report as mandatory reporters, which is good news, but I don't suspicion that would never happen. Some other activities. We have a Tuesday night fundraise. Could bring another 20 people to the club, and sometimes our kids have participated in the fundraise as well. We offer an opportunity for them to ride along on a boat, but there'll be other people on the grounds that night. We're having an open house on Wednesday. So during an open house, we have members of the community looking at our club, and they'll be escorted when they're on our grounds, so you may see people that you don't recognize on our club. We have Thursday night racing. Now the barbecue, Bucket Burger, takes place over at Richardson during the month of June, but we have, help me out, some of you that are racers. How many people come on the grounds to race on a Thursday? Crew and sailors, skippers. 60 or 70 people that are not necessarily part of sales school. Plus, we have our young people, usually Terry arranges for them to do ride-alongs, so there's a lot of interaction there. So you'll see a lot of people there. As I mentioned, we have other members and guests who are just part of our club that are out here during the week. It's a great time for those of you that are regulars, and most of us I consider regulars, to introduce yourself to our guests, to the families whose kids are here that are not members of our club. I think sales school, I think Mark would back me up, is probably one of our biggest recruiting tools for new membership. So we say to a new family, you have 2 coupons you can use for sales school when you're a new family your first year. So we have 23 of those students this year. So that means we have at least, 10, 12 brand new families who have joined the last year whose kids are coming to sales school. So we want them to feel like they're known at the end of this week. That we've made friends with them, and they become a part of our wider, EYC family. So it's a great opportunity to do that. If you see a kid that is not acting in a safe manner, it's up to you as a member of the club to point it out to them, and if you're not getting some response, to find Katie, find their parent. We don't want to have kids running on docks. We don't want to have kids out on docks without life jackets. We don't want to have kids, doing things that are not safe. The most important safety equipment is the easiest and often the most forgotten that results in injuries at the club. Okay, and it's really simple stuff. Okay, the number one injury during sales school can be prevented with sunscreen. And the kids aren't often aware of that, but they need to lather up in the morning, lather up at lunchtime, lather up in the afternoon.
Don't put sunscreen on kids. It's another one of those touchy-feely deals that we want to make sure they are putting on their own sunscreen. Got the spray kind, so if they need you to spray down their back, that's one thing, but no putting on sunscreen for kids. That was something new that came up last week.
It's a very good point, came up last week. The second most common injury at the club can be solved with a water bottle, and it's called dehydration. Kids forget to drink and they're outside in the sun, so you can encourage your kids to be sure and drink enough water so that they're staying hydrated. The third most common injury at the club are foot injuries. And foot injuries occur because of a lack of shoes. And you see kids running around the grounds, running on the docks or walking on the docks, and I don't know how many splinters we end up pulling out. But we've kind of got our clover under control this year, but we often have bee stings because kids are running around, particularly out that grass out there, and playing volleyball without shoes on and stuff. So that's a really common one that's easy to prevent. We do have the kayaks and the paddle boards, and you do need to have a life jacket on when you're using any of our club boats, because that's a liability issue for them and it's a liability issue for us. So if you see kids on club boats, either the 2 kayaks or the 2 SUPs, or our lasers, or our Zumas, you'd have to make sure they're wearing a life jacket. And they should all come with life jackets anyway. Adults on our club boats must have life jackets on. Anybody using a club boat must have a life jacket on. A stand-up paddleboard or a club boat. Any general questions, comments about child youth safety? Yeah, Al.
We didn't touch on cyber privacy. Texts and emails to kids should always be included. Another adult should be included. Let's say you take a picture of a kid sailing, I'll text it to you. Better include an adult on that. So whenever because granted we're only 100 yards from the kids, text and email, or text mostly, is one of the common ways of communicating. Always include an adult with any conversations on text or whatever,
okay.
For any reason.
Very good point, yeah.
Including parents in emails that maybe you're emailing to kids about the class, or anybody under 18. Any pictures, again, just, make a copy, make sure that you're not the only person sending that.
The fourth most common injury, besides sunscreen, water bottles, and shoes, the fourth most common injury is a lack of sleep. And you can just chart the injuries based on how little sleep kids are getting. I've done camps over the years, and you can just watch by Wednesday, Thursday, more kids start to report getting injuries. So we are going to really kind of work with the curfew and really try to get some rest this week, if we possibly can. We appreciate you taking a time out of your week to come out here. It's a privilege to get to work with our young people. For many of you in this room, this is one of the most fun weeks of your year. the chance to teach some people to sail, the chance to hang out at the energy of the club, the chance to meet some families, the chance to drive a rescue boat. It really is a delightful time. I know it's the highlight of my year, of my sailing year, is to get to teach new sailors and sort of see them kind of get it. One of the core values and one of the appeals of the Eugene Yacht Club is that it feels safe. People tell me all the time, you know, I used to be over at the park, I moored over there, and then I joined the club. I could never send my kids to the restroom by themselves. I could never leave them on the boat for 25 minutes and feel like it was going to be okay. I came over here and I feel like I can say to my kids, yeah, you can go swimming, or yeah, you can go to the bathroom, or yeah, you can go over and, you know, fill up your water bottle in the clubhouse or whatever. In an age of growing family anxiety, this is a bit of an oasis where families can let down their guard a little bit, knowing that their kids are going to be looked after safely. Thank you all for supporting youth sailing. I think we're writing some exciting new chapters in our club's history right now. It's exciting. Thank you all. Thanks, Karen, for reporting.
Thank you.